Welcome to Up My Hockey with Jason Podolin, where we deconstruct the NHL journey, discuss what it takes to make it, and have a few laughs along the way. I'm your host, Jason Podolin, a 31st overall draft pick who played 41 NHL games, but thought he was destined for 1,000. Learn from my story and those of my guests. This is a hockey podcast about reaching your potential. Hello there, and welcome back to Up My Hockey podcast with Jason Podolin for episode number 32. Today we have Tyson Nash aboard the pod, and if you're in for some smiles and in for a few laughs, you're going to get them today because this episode is full of pretty outrageous stories and some real good, hard talk about what it takes to make it. The road that is the hard one is often the way, and Tyson really exemplifies that in this episode. So you're in for a treat here. On another note, I just want to do a shout out to episode 31 and Mr. Nathan Lafayette. If you have not heard that podcast yet, please go back. It received so many great reviews, so many compliments towards Nathan for being vulnerable enough, for sharing his own experience, applying his expert and professional perspective on how that applies not only now, but how it applies moving forward. So younger athletes and people in general, regardless if it's in sports or in business organizations, can move forward, and we can get beyond race and the inequalities that exist and the injustices that exist there. And I felt that Nathan handled the topic with a certain deftness that a lot of people can't. I don't think he was divisive on it. I think he was very reflective, and I think it's a topic. Well, I know it's a topic that it's not going away, and I don't want it to go away until we get to a spot, white, black, brown, everyone is on the same playing field. So Nathan, thank you again for doing that. And please, if you haven't heard it, go back and listen, as it is a cultural subject matter, and I think the moment is fresh and ready for that conversation. So thanks again, Nathan. As far as Tyson goes, his story is amazing. I really enjoy his story. I knew him from back in Sherwood Park, and that's where this whole thing starts. But just what he was able to do at the junior level, for starters. Only one team can win a championship, and at major junior level in the CHL, 60 teams currently compete every season for the Memorial Cup. That means 59 organizations aren't happy, making it one of the toughest trophies in sports to win. But Nasher raised the Memorial Cup 3 times in 4 years with the Kamloops Blazers in 1992, 94, and 95, which is a stretch of dominance never seen prior and probably never seen again. Because winning is hard, right? And making the NHL is hard. And Tyson Nash was able to accomplish both. Tyson did not have an easy path to the show. He was overlooked completely in his first year of NHL draft eligibility, and he did not get taken until the 11th round, his second time through. The year the Kamloops Blazers even won a Memorial Cup, and he was a pretty key player in that. He didn't go until the Canucks took him at 247. Now, Nash had already played with a chip on his shoulder, and this gave him even more fuel for the fire. And he set out to prove that these guys were wrong, that they missed the mark, that they underestimated him, and that he did belong and that he could contribute. And Nash made his dream come true, playing 6 seasons in the NHL from 1999 to 2006 with the St. Louis Blues and the Phoenix Coyotes. And Nash's agitator style earned him a lot of enemies along the way. He was considered at one time to be one of hockey's most hated players. And, there's some scenarios there where he said that, he regretted some of the stuff that he said, but he did his job to the best of ability, and he wanted to stay there, and he knew what his role was, and he did it well. And if I had to pick one word to describe Nasher, I'd probably say competitor would be most appropriate. He fought for absolutely everything he got, sometimes literally and sometimes figuratively, because the road wasn't easy, and his job wasn't easy. But he had a dream, and he had a commitment to that dream that was so firm that nothing was going to get in his way. Lots of cool stuff in this episode, lots of stuff to learn. Nasher talks about how to turn rejection into fuel. He talks about what he believes are the key ingredients to building a championship team. He talks about the sage advice his dad gave him before he arrived in St. Louis. That was super pivotal, and how he made an impression there and ended up making that team. And he talks about how to get noticed and make people remember you. And we talk about a few elements now as a player where we feel that you can completely stand out because these attributes really aren't stepped into that often. So lots of great stories here in this episode, lots of good laughs. I know you're going to enjoy it. So please enjoy the ride with Tyson Nash. All right, here we are back into the Up My Hockey podcast for episode number 32. And it's funny, we're in this new age of doing business. We're looking at a camera and we're really like 2 miles apart right now. You're down the lake there, but it's Tyson Nash joining us today from Lake Country on Okanagan Lake. Thanks for joining us, man.
Love to be here, man. It's just nice to be relative that actually someone wants to actually talk to me, believe it or not.
Instead of you talking to them, right? There you
Yeah,
go.
exactly.
You get to have someone ask you some questions. I wore my hat today, special for you.
Oh, I
For your
like that.
selection. So I got one of my alma mater, Spokane Chiefs. Nasher and I went to battle a few times over the course of our junior careers because Kamloops was just up the way, and we both had pretty strong teams back in the day. And unfortunately, we came out on the wrong side of some of those battles. But I thought I'd represent.
I like it. I should have had mine on. What the heck? They'll be disappointed. I think we
Yeah.
actually had a scrap back in the day too.
I think we
It,
did. Yeah, I was trying to
it,
remember that, to be honest, and I'm like, I think we did, but like,
oh,
my
as if
memory.
you don't remember. Come on, you beat me. You beat
Did I?
me. Like
Did
fair
I?
and square. Like, come on, you always remember your wins.
See, that's funny. I mean, I honestly, 100%, I don't. I was like, gosh, one thing I do remember playing you guys was that Tux. Tucker was always, I mean, and I knew him a little bit then, right? But the way he played and like he never fought against us. And like I tried, right? And I tried and he didn't want to. And he was just small to me. And but then he got big. And then he was like scrappy and like tough in the show. Like that
Yeah,
whole evolution of Darcy Tucker like blew my mind. But
yeah.
I don't even know if we should go there. But like what did he fight in junior? Like he never
Oh,
fought us.
you know what? He never grew. He never got big. I mean, his whole career. I mean, even to this day, maybe he ballooned a little bit. I think he swallowed an airbag like all of us when we retire. But no, he was tough, man. He's farmer strength. He's farmer tough. He was wiry, and you could punch him square in the nose, and it just made him squirrely. I think he was one of those guys though that was so offensive and so talented that he didn't really have to fight all that much later on in junior. But
Right.
when we were 16, I fought him in practice. He fought Daryl Sador in practice. I mean, as 16-year-olds with that team that we had in Kamloops, we did anything it took to get in the lineup, and he was a complete freaking animal.
That's cool to know, yeah,
Yeah,
because it's just and again, right, you play different guys, and I mean, we played him a lot, but he was just never I never saw that edge to him. Like I saw that he was always lippy, right?
yeah,
He was always
yeah.
feisty. He always had something to say, but he just never really seemed to wanna do anything about it. And then for me watching him, I thought he got bigger just like to me, he looked like he got stronger, right? Like it seemed to me like he got bigger, his upper body and stuff, and then he kind of took on this totally different role in the NHL, and that was always kind of a little bit shocking to me. But yeah, that's funny that we went back. Do you know what? Do you know what year that was? Do you remember the year that was that we fought?
Oh, I have no idea.
No idea.
I'm so bad with years.
Yeah,
I don't know. It was
that's wild. I love that we
long
did.
time ago. Yeah.
Too bad we didn't like. We're like 10 years younger, and then we probably have it on tape. But no one was recording that crap back when we were
Yeah.
playing. So
Well, thank goodness for me in that one.
that's awesome. You mentioned. I mean, I don't know where the best place to start is. I mean, I want to get to Kamloops 100% and that team, but I think an interesting place for you and I is, and probably more for me, to be honest, than you, because why would you really care or know too much about me? But because I was a year younger than you, and I went to Sherwood Park. Is that where you were born? Were you from Sherwood Park, or where were you born?
Yeah, I was born well in Edmonton, but I was raised in Sherwood Park my whole life. Was it 20, 15 minutes outside Edmonton? Yeah.
Right, and your 75 birthday, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, so I came to Sherwood Park that year with the Dubinsky's. Ended up making a phone call to Mike Dubinsky. They kicked our butt in the Pee Wee tournament in Vernon that we always had, and I don't know. I was kind of just upset with Vernon minor hockey. I'm like, you know what? I want to go play in Alberta if I can, And Mike said, yeah, come on out. Ended up staying with him for a little bit. Went to training camp, and we had one of the best teams, I think, Bantam hockey has ever seen. Like it was crazy, that team. But what was interesting is that you could have been on that team, but you weren't. Like, were you? Did you advance and play in the midgets that year, or where were you?
Yeah, so I think we were actually the best team the year before, So I played with Mike Dubinsky, because you never played just birth year like they do now, at least in Arizona, which I
Yeah,
think is so wrong to me because it's not real life.
yeah,
You should always be a rookie, you should always be a veteran. But yeah, the next year, instead of playing again with that team as the older guy, I moved on and I played as a underage, as a 15-year-old with the Alberta Chain Gang at the
right.
time is what it was. So I
Yeah,
moved up a couple of years. So, and it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me because you learn to play against guys that are older than you, which is what happens your entire career, right?
right.
So
No, yeah, because that was interesting because you definitely like there was. I mean, you had a name at that time. Obviously, you were good enough to go up and play there. Um, so there was like that intrigue of who Tyson Nash was and what he was all about, and now looking back on it, I mean, if you were on our team, like we had like 13 guys that played, I think, in the WHL from that team. I think we had
wow,
5 guys playing the NHL from a Bantam team. Like,
wow.
I mean, like we didn't lose like our first 33 games of the year or something. Like it was just kind of one of those crazy, crazy years.
Was
Uh,
Damon Langkow on that team too?
yeah,
Yeah,
and he was kind of okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like I mean, I say that, I mean, with all honesty, right? Like he was my left winger. I was center at the time, and Dubber was my right winger, and we were all 3 first years, right?
yeah.
In the hell of a good hockey league, right? Like that was
Oh
a
yeah,
really good league. I remember when I showed up there because I came from Vernon. We had a pretty good program in Vernon, but I remember leaving that first tryout going, "Oh my God, I might not make this team." Like that was like what I felt. Like I was just because
yeah.
everyone seemed so good. I mean, I think I ended up being second in the league in points that year or something. So it ended up working out well. And we had a great team. And Mark Hurley, he still holds that over my head that he finished a couple points higher than me that year. But yeah, back to Lanks. But Lanks was probably the dead weight on that line. We were all buddies and we'd make fun of him. He'd miss an open net on the like Dubber and I were setting him up, and he still had good points and stuff. But my gosh, did he end up becoming a player in junior? Like that was an awesome evolution to see with him, and obviously had a great NHL career too. But so that's interesting. So we go back to Sherwood Park, and that's one of the best times. Because success, I mean, not that we won everything, but we won a lot. We didn't win a championship, but it was great friendships there. I'm still friends with a lot of those guys. And then we both graduated. I had one more year in Penticton as BCJ, and then you went to Kamloops after that. What I was going to ask you though is like to get moved up in minor hockey. Were you always kind of the star then? Were you the guy? Were you the go-to guy the whole time, points guy? That MVP type player.
Um, yeah, you know what? I mean, I don't know. I guess yeah, I was pretty decent back then. I remember I was listed at that Vernon tournament, which is funny. Um, as I think a 12 or 13-year-old, whatever the earliest age was. And that was a big deal because I think it took up like 3 or 4 spots on the
Mhm.
Blazers their list sheet or whatever it was, and they took a chance on me. And yeah, I mean, I was good back then. I think I was kind of a hybrid, I was like that old school kind of power forward, and I could still score, kind of like the Rick Tocchet type of guy, like at that age and in
Mhm.
that environment. So yeah, I mean, I was obviously pretty good. I played as a 15-year-old in Kamloops. I played the maximum amount of games. Vern Dubinsky actually was the guy. He called me out of English class in grade 10 when I was 15 and picked me up and said, "We're going to Regina. You're playing your first game in the WHL." And he drove me there in his old, I don't know what it was, big red Oldsmobile, and we right through the snow and blizzard, and we got there halfway through the first period, and that's how my WHL career started.
Come on, halfway through the first period, you showed up and you had to get dressed by yourself in the locker room, and you played the
Oh
second.
yeah. Yeah, I had the big face shield on, and I'll never forget. Like again, it comes back to my whole birth year hockey. I'm so against it. And that's how we do it in Arizona, where I'm from with our kids.
Right.
But now I'm a 15-year-old kid. I've never, at least I played with, I moved up and I played with the midgets, right? So I'm used to playing with 18-year-old kids and 17-year-old kids, but I'm playing now with 20-year-old guys and 19-year-old guys. You walk in, after in the shower, and you're like, oh my god, I'm like a 15-year-old boy, I'm like, what the, like, I don't belong. So it was really intimidating for sure.
100%. And what was the story behind that? Like, why late to the game, and why, like, how did you not know you were playing? Why was it such a sudden thing?
I think they had some injuries. They played the night before, and I believe it was Moose Jaw, and I was as close by as they could get, and I this it was the blizzard that got us there late.
Right.
Obviously, it was nuts. It was crazy, but it was like the most exciting thing. I couldn't settle down all the way there. I think it was like a 6 or 7 hour car ride to Regina. But it was something I will never forget. Walking onto that bench, walking into the locker room, seeing my jersey hanging there. I mean, it
Right.
was something. It's every kid's dream, right, to play in
Yeah.
the Western League. So
That's super cool, and especially since you got listed, and I share that with you as well because I was listed at 13, and I think unless they changed, I think that was the earliest you could get it, and it was on my 13th. I mean, my 13th birthday where I got listed, and I mean from that point on, I wanted to be a Chief. Period.
yeah,
And really look forward to that opportunity. And it's funny you talk about Vern Dubinsky, like they opened their house to me, right? Like Vern was my surrogate dad for a while because my dad had to stay back in Vernon and still, pay the bills and do the business, and he'd come out for the weekend for games and stuff. But for the first, I think, month or so, like I was another son in the Dubinsky household. So
yeah,
Vern and Don opened their doors to me, and we're still in contact to this day. And that was a very, very impressionable year. Were
yeah.
you? I mean, how tall are you now? You're like you're 5'11", 6-footer kind of guy.
Yeah, I'm borderline. Yeah, I like to say 6 foot, but my wife's like, no, you're five. My son more than anyone. You're 5'11", Dad. Maybe with soap bars in your socks, you're 6 feet. But oh, and I was gonna tell you though, Puds, a funny story. So back to the Dubinsky's. So I'm sitting there. I go watch my son. We're in Winnipeg. I catch a plane this past season,
Yep.
and my son's playing for the Lethbridge Hurricanes now in the Western Hockey League. So I catch a plane to Regina, and I'm in the stands. And who comes up behind me and slaps me in the ear? Well, Mike Dubinsky. He's there watching his son Cole, and I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, this is so crazy. Like how the world and the
Yeah.
hockey world turns, right?
That's
So
awesome.
it was pretty crazy.
That is cool. And I want to get to that then. That's wild because I love that the next generation coming through, right? I mean, it ages us, but it's super, for me, it's really wild because, which is one of the reasons why I'm even doing what I'm doing, because it's like, okay, we had the experience as a player, right? We went through the things you went through, the driving in the blizzards, the wanting to play in the WHL, the moving up, dealing with trying to be a 16-year-old, all these things we had to do as professional players. And now we see it through a different lens, and our kids are going through it, right? And there's other kids that are going through it, and it's a whole different perspective. So I totally want to get that father perspective from you. But I want to go back just to that minor hockey and just with the size. Like, did you get big early? Like, did you grow a little more quicker than everybody else? So you had a physical advantage at a younger age?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely wasn't small. I was bigger than average, when I was 13, 14, 15. And like I said, I was a real physical player. And I used to just try to destroy people, right? So you had the skill side of it, and then you had the physical side of it. And, it just seemed to work. Obviously, things have changed greatly now. I mean, I look at these players in the NHL and I'm like, oh my God, like some of them, I can't even believe they're in the league. I'm like, you guys look like little kids, little boys, like Clayton Keller. I mean, he's 165 pounds. I'm like, I show my son every day. I'm like, see, you do not need to be 6'6", 210 pounds, which is what you had to be back in the day when we played. I mean, if you
Yeah.
were over 6'3", you were a first round draft pick. I mean, it was that simple. But now it's completely changed. It's all about speed. It's all about skill. And if you have size and have all those things, well, then look out too.
Yeah, that's an even bigger advantage. And we've talked about that a little bit here, and especially now that it's playoff time, where
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a different game, right? And if you want to
Yeah.
win the big prize, you can't have a bunch of water bugs running around, right? You need a few heavy guys that like to mix it up, and I
Yeah.
think because those players are getting fewer and farther between, like their value right on the open market is going way up because you want to have those guys that can play, right? Obviously, you got to be able to play still, but
Yeah.
if you can play and inflict a little damage and having a little intimidation factor to you, that's a pretty special combo in this day and age.
Oh, yeah. Like that Wilson, I can promise you, still to this day, that Wilson in Washington, every GM in the league is saying, go find me a Wilson, go find me a Ryan Reeves.
Yeah.
because as you mentioned, I mean, those guys are just so valuable at playoff time for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I was just wondering that because I mean, a lot of the people that listen to the show, some are parents, some are young players coming up, and just that evolution. I talk about the journey of getting to where you want to go. And I was a bigger guy too. Like I grew quicker than a lot of people, right? So I was 6, 7 inches taller than most guys in Pee Wee and especially in Bantam. So you know, it was it was easier for me to be better, right?
Right.
Because if you have a little bit of skill and stuff, and now you're bigger and you have that physical advantage, okay, I mean, imagine, right, being
Yeah.
being that way in the NHL. So I think both of us kind of experienced that, and then other guys kind of caught up, right? I mean, guys started getting bigger, guys start catching up, and it evens the playing field a little bit. But you then as a 13-year-old listed guy, like that's essentially a blue chip prospect and a real high priority item piece for the Kamloops Blazers. And you came in with the likes of Darcy Tucker that I don't think was listed at 13. Like, and it's just I like talking about that whole dynamic, right? Because you probably there's a little pecking order that we all go through, right? Like, where do I fit? Who am I against? What role am I going to fill? Um, Tux ends up leading the WHL in scoring, and I think that your best year was 20, and not to throw that at you or anything, but like I think you kind of started to see where your role was. And even with that team, you started talking about that team and trying to fit in and trying to get in the lineup. Was that part of your own personal evolution to try and figure out, hey, how am I going to get this done?
Yeah, and I have good and bad, and I don't want to bore you to death with it, but I have mixed feelings about it. Just because I still was a very skilled player, and I think when you're a 16-year-old and you're trying to make the team that we were trying to make, which when I was 16, we won the Memorial Cup. We had the likes of Daryl Sador, Scott Niedermeyer, Zach Boyer. I mean, we were built to win. So I think at the time they were only going to their plan was to take one 16-year-old, maybe two. And I wasn't really on their radar screen at that time. There was a kid there. His name was Grant Stefanowski, and he was a big kid. He was like 6'2", 180 pounds, which was massive at 16, right?
Yeah.
So I'll never forget. We played it was the rookie game that was leading into the main camp, right? So this kid was the talk of camp. He had a great rookie camp, and I'm like sitting there going, "Oh my god!" Like I'm like down on the pecking order right now. Like I'm not even like being talked about here. So he slashes me in the corner. He was on the other team, and I am pissed. And I'm like, "Oh, really?" And it was supposed to be no hitting in the camp. So he kind of slashes me and cross checks me in the corner. And I'm like, "This is the guy I'm competing against." I'm like, so he gets the puck. He comes up the blue line, comes across the blue line, and I catch him in the trolley tracks and I hit him and I laid him out. It's the hardest hit I've ever made in my entire life. His helmet friggin' flew up into the rafters. He landed. They ended up carrying him off, sadly, in a stretcher. And I don't think he ever played hockey again.
Really?
And yeah, and I remember Bob Brown pulling me into the office and he was like, "What the hell are you doing?" And I'm like, and I was in tears. I was crying. I'm like, "Well, he slashed me in the corner." But to this day, that was the only reason I made the Kamloops Blazers at 16. Even though I was listed, even though I was a big prospect, that was the only reason because I had to make room for myself. I had to do what it took to get my name and get noticed, right?
Right.
And then later on, and as you evolve as a 16-year-old, Don Hay, who I'm still, I'm happy because he molded me into the player that I was, but I was also kind of like, well, you took the skill completely right out of my game. Like every time I got the puck, I was supposed to dump it in and chase it and hit somebody in the corner. And I'm like, like I'm more than that, like
Right.
and I see all these other guys playing on the power play, like Darcy Tucker. And I'm like, how come he's playing on the power play and I never get a chance? Like I don't think I got 1 second of power play time in junior, and I was still able to, put up 35 goals and 75 points in my 19-year-old year. But
Right.
it was a grind. I always had that burning desire to be more and be better, and I think that's the chip on my shoulder though that also made me who I was.
Right. Right. That's interesting. I was going to ask you that because you did. I mean, I think that's the maturation of most players, right? You start in a spot, especially on a junior team, and then by the time you get whatever it is, your draft year, your third year, or even your fourth year, like now you've grown into a leadership role. You're getting
Yeah.
different minutes. But even in that scenario, when you had that great year at the end, you still weren't considered to be a power play guy.
No, never. Never.
Wow.
He never put me on the power play, and I had so many meetings with Don Hay, and he'd tell you this today. I would go into his office so screaming mad, and like I remember I was a healthy scratch one night at 18. I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" Like I couldn't wrap my head around it. But he also knew how to motivate me.
Yeah.
Um, you know, sadly, because but it worked for me. It did work for me. I don't think that's how you motivate kids now necessarily, but
Right.
um, it worked. And again, it's kind of how I found my niche in the NHL too.
Yeah. Well, that's what I want to talk about because I thought looking at those teams, like you said, like you win you win three Memorial Cups in 4 years, right? I mean,
Yeah,
like that's nuts. And then the people that came through there, some are household names, right? That everyone's going to remember. I
yeah,
mean, especially like a Jerome McGinley or a Scott Niedermayer or Shane Doan, right? There's three Hall of Famers. Like ridiculous in 4 years. Um, but there's also some other names there. But me looking back on it, and it's interesting for me because I'm a guy now on the other side of the fence playing against you guys. Like I thought that your collective unit was better than the individual pieces. And what I mean by that is like the guys that went on to play in the NHL and had great careers and better careers than I did. Like at the time, I was like, they're okay, like, and I don't want to name names, but I mean, there's like 9 guys I think on that one team that ended up playing, in games in the NHL. And I thought that if you took them out and put them on individual teams, like they wouldn't be the best defenseman, let's say, on that team, or they wouldn't
right.
be, like, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong with that, but do you have a feeling that like whatever was going on there, because you said like you were playing a role that maybe you didn't want to play, but you embraced it and you did it, right? Like did everyone like kind of finding their own piece there and being in that competitive environment, was that something that made all of you guys better?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I mean when you fight it because you want to be the guy, but you also look around and go, okay, well, I'm not the guy right now. Darcy Tucker's the guy. Shane Doan's the guy. So I need to find my niche and my role on this team. And I think ultimately, when you're on a winning team like that and in a winning environment, when scouts come to watch, they come to watch for a reason because you're a winner and your team wins, and they're like, what do these kids have? And how have they bought in? And that's the type of player that I want over the individual guy in Brandon who's putting up 40 goals or 50 goals a year because he doesn't know how to be on a team. He doesn't know how to win. And I mean, you need to know how to win no matter what level it is. You need to know how it feels. You need to know what it takes to win. And when you get all that, that's when scouts take notice and they go, I want that player because I think that still transfers over from junior to the American League to the NHL and in life. You realize, and that's what the Kamloops Blazers they taught me was how to be a winner, how to play, and accept a role and be a part of a winning environment.
Yeah, I mean that's really succinct, I think, the way you put it, and I'm glad you said it that way because one of the toughest things, and I'm sure you're going to have that with your son too. Right now, he's going through it, and even we'll talk about your time in the minors. But I thought even especially in the minors, right? Like, well, junior too. You want to get drafted. Everyone wants to have like the light shining on them. They want to be that
Yeah,
guy. Obviously, the higher you get drafted, the more money you're going to make as a signing bonus. There's all these like personal motivations that are happening there. And then in the minors, you want to be in the NHL. So how can you support somebody playing ahead of you, right? When you think that they're higher in the pecking order,
yeah,
but winning gives opportunities,
yeah,
right? Being a part of something. Anyone who wins a Calder Cup is like almost half of those guys the next year go somewhere and play in the NHL, right? Same
yep,
thing with your junior team is what I was saying. It's like guys are there. Maybe they're there watching Jerome McGinley. Maybe they're there to watch Darcy Tucker. But guess what? They end up watching everybody,
yep. They watch
and
the
they end up
Tyson
seeing everybody.
Nashes, the Brad Lukowiczes, the
Mm-hmm.
Nolan Baumgartners, the Strudwicks. You get noticed, and again, people want that in their organization. They want winners, and the Blazers, they were tough. They grinded us, and I mean, but you can't help but appreciate, what they gave to you as a player and as a person. More importantly, I mean, we had to respect the B on the jersey, whether we were out in public or what. There's so much more to being a great athlete than just hockey itself.
Did you? And I was going to ask you that just about that whole culture, winning three Memorial Cups in 4 years. I don't even think it's ever been done. And then Now you're going to go pro. Now you play for St. Louis. Now you play, drafted by Vancouver. You're in these different organizations. Like you probably, I would assume, didn't realize how special that environment was in Kamloops because it was probably hard to ever find again. Maybe you never did see it again, right? Where it was just like that tight, whatever was going on there, that recipe that everyone's trying to find. It doesn't exist wherever you
No.
go. And I felt it a couple of times in my career. But is that accurate? Me saying that it was hard to see again.
Yeah, yeah, and you realize how special it is more than anything. You're like, oh man, like I don't think I appreciate it because you're in it, right? You're winning. You just think it's supposed to happen, right? You're
Yeah.
playing with all these great players, and every time you throw on the helmet and the jersey, you have a feeling like you're going to win or you're supposed to win. And then all of a sudden you go play and you're in Syracuse and in the American Hockey League, and you're like, oh my god, like we're just getting pumped over here, and we don't have the guys to do anything about it, like this is awful. So you learn the other side of it too, right? And then when I went to St. Louis, I found it again, and I'm like, oh my god, like with all these players we have, Pierre Turgeon, like Keith Kachuk, Doug Waite, I'm like, I feel like we can win every night, and you get it all back again, so
Right.
it's pretty cool, pretty cool.
You feel that I know that Bob Brown there in Kamloops, or Rob Brown built the no, it's Bob, right? Bob Brown.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bob Brown was a real big factor, like had one of the best scouting engines going, right? And really developed their players there too, which was huge. But Don Hay was there. You mentioned Don. You mentioned the leaders that were there, like the Scott Niedermayers. Like where in your mind does it start? Does it start right at the top with a guy like Bob, or does it start with the coach that's leading, or does a majority of the ownership rest on who has the letters on their chest in the locker room?
I think it's all encompassing. I think for sure it starts with Bob Brown. I really do, especially for young kids. He was an intimidating man, but he was also a fair man, and he knew what it took to win. And he was going to bring in and keep and mold the players that were going to give him what he wanted and what the city wanted. And then he brings in a coach, which is another big piece to the puzzle because he's your leader. He's the guy giving the speeches. He's the guy that really molds these young kids because we're all so, we're like sponges, right? We're looking and trying to learn and feel it all out, and the coach becomes so important. And then your leaders, of course, they got to be the right guys. They have to be selfless. I know it's hard because it is, and you can't see the future. But we had guys like Shane Doan and like even Tux, but Scott Niedermayer, Daryl Sador, these guys knew somehow down deep they were going to move on and they were going to play in the NHL. So the team, they were never above the team, and they always did what was best for the team. And I think that's just so valuable. And I think it's just when you can learn from guys like that and watch how they work. And for young kids watching, that's what you need to do. You need to watch your leaders and your best players and watch what they do. Watch how they prepare. Watch what they eat. Watch what they drink. Watch the amount of rest they get. I mean, there's no secret to it. Not anymore. I mean, when we played, the best players, sometimes they just came in and they just got it done. But now you have to do all the little things. It's the little things that give you the big reward at the end.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's such an interesting thing. And now, even with what you're doing now, you maybe you're involved in it. One, you're talking to these guys, but you also see the teams come through. And that's something that I've been watching too, because just with my platform here in this podcast, uh, I love that character element, that person element. I know you've probably heard me talk about it before, but you're right. Back in our day, like if you had the right kind of toolbox, right,
Yeah.
that was enough a lot of times, right? And that would get you where you needed to go. Now there's that other element that I think is relevant. And when you talk about team leadership and captains, the teams that are just quick to put the captain on their best player, and he might be a 21-year-old. I find that that's sometimes the wrong choice,
Hmm.
and it's tough to win with that. So, anyways, do you see that? Like, do you still feel like there's a little bit of an old traditionalist view of the captaincy, like I'm seeing it? Like, put it on the guy that actually is the best example, maybe not the best player.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more. I think coaches make a big mistake a lot of times with who they give it to. And a lot of times your best player isn't your captain. He's it's the it's the third line centerman, or it's that, big rugged defenseman who is the glue to the team, who is really the guy that everyone's listening to and respecting in the locker room. I mean, just because you put up the most points every night doesn't mean you earn the respect of your team. So I do feel that way. I know even at the NHL level, it is an issue. It's such an important thing, though.
Right. And I think you guys had that in Kamloops too, because I mean, I don't know Darcy Hucker's habits, but the way he played, he seemed like he showed up every night, right? He was a guy that gave 100%. And it was if your best player and now go to the NHL level is like, why did Pittsburgh have success for so long? I mean, I've heard endless stories about how hard Crosby works, how prepared he is, right? When your best player then is also your most prepared player and your hardest worker, now you have this example that how the hell can a third line guy leave the rink before he does, or not show up when he does, right? And I think that's the thing that really starts help building culture too, because those guys have to lead by example and have to be somebody you want to follow. And was that example, like, I think that it seems to me that was there through those years in Kamloops, right? I mean, you had the Zach Boyers, you had the Scott Niedermayer, you had these guys just kept filling in, right? And then there's Jerome McGinley by the time you were leaving, right? It's just like, wow, it seemed like leader after leader after leader was there from the get-go.
Yeah, and you know what the interesting one, like to your point again, that team that we had as when I was 16, with all those players, Scott Niedermayer, Daryl Sador, well, they weren't the captain. It was Craig Bonner who was our captain. And Craig
Right.
Bonner is now a scout, I think the head pro scout for the Dallas Stars. But this guy, I mean, he was like a big battleship. He wasn't all that talented, but he'd fight anyone. He was the ultimate team guy, and he was the glue that kept that team and all those personalities in check. And he wasn't afraid. A captain is a guy who has to say and do the hard things, right? He has to
Mm.
say, hey, Nasher, like that wasn't good enough today. And you do it in the right way, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was my first experience of a real captain and what it meant and how important it was. And then I moved on to pro, and I didn't have another really good captain until the St. Louis Blues. And I had the best captain, I think, of all time, and one of the best defensemen of all time. And his name was Chris Pronger. And Al McInnes was a little bit older at the time, but he was for sure the best player. We just won the Norris Trophy, but Chris Pronger was our captain, and everyone knew it. And he showed me and taught me what a captain was all about, because he would go in that locker room. He didn't care who you were. Pierre Turgeon, Pavel Demitra, he would rip you a new one, and he would motivate you, and he would tell you how it is, because every night he was doing it, and he expected it from everyone, and he knew what it was going to take to win. And I'll tell you what, that guy is an absolute stud, and I learned so much from him.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, let's get in. Well, maybe we'll get back to him because I want to talk about your time in the minors too, and I did want to talk about Pronger because for some of the younger listeners here, it's sort of, I mean, it's definitely not forgotten from our era because he was what you said he was. I mean, he got the Oilers almost single-handedly into the finals that one year, and just a force. And I do want to talk about your experience with him, but out of the Kamloops teams, we'll tie a bow on this Kamloops. Which team do you think was the best? You mentioned that first year, and I looked at the guys that were on it, and not as many household names. Like as far as there's a couple big names that went on to play NHL, but I think there's like two or three guys that kind of went on to play in the NHL, and some guys sort of East Coast League guys. It seemed like, which was interesting. So that might have been an interesting environment to be in too. But then you had like the '93 or the '94 team that had like 8 guys or 9 guys go to the NHL? Like, which team do you think was the most special one?
Oh man, it's tough because I would, they were all so good, all so different, right? Different eras. I mean, the 16-year-old year I won, that team was so good, but I think it was the last year, our last year there, we won it in Kamloops. I think we were like a freight train, like as far as a team and the individuals we had. Like we had Shane Doan, who missed the year before because he had knee surgery, so he was hungry. He was the MVP of our team that year. It wasn't Darcy Tucker. It was Shane Doan, who was my right winger. And Jerome McGinley, he was coming into another level, just evolving every single year, and obviously turning into the player that he turned into. Nat Domicelli, Darcy Tucker, Jason Strudwick, Nolan Baumgartner. I mean, just so many
Yeah.
guys. And then we had the foot soldiers, which are also so important. Like whether you're the Detroit Red Wings with McCarty, Draper, Maltby, I mean, Holmstrom, those guys are the guys that make you win. And it's not always the Steve Yzermans or the Fedorovs or at that time the Darcy Tuckers or the Shane Doans. It was like the Mike Josephsons and the Bob Westerbys of our team that really scored big goals for us in those tournaments and in the playoffs. And honestly, that's what makes hockey pod so amazing is that it does take every single guy.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's what do they say? It's like a weak link sport or a top link sport. Like, like basketball is more like you need to have like the one or two best players. And if you have the one or two best players, you're probably going to win. In hockey, you can have the best player, you're not going to win because there's just too
Uh,
much involved. There's too many dynamics there. You need everybody to be able to pull that rope. So no, that's great. And what a great lesson from such an early age. I think that was special, and special to me to be a part of it. Even like I said, I was on the other side of the fence for most of it. But I mean, to see a championship group like that kind of go through and see the evolution, like you said, like you mentioned Jerome McGinley, like unbelievable what he turned into because it wasn't. I mean, you watched him as a 16-year-old. I mean, I didn't see him leading the NHL in goals one season, but like by his last year junior, that was a little more apparent, right? And I think that little Kamloops Blazer factory there was interesting because everyone seemed to, get better, and stepped into their own. And yes, super cool to see. How about the draft for you, man? I noticed that we were in actually the same draft. So I guess you never got drafted like your first year of eligibility. But then you got in and went to what'd you go 247 in the 10th round there to Vancouver. Was that expected? Like, did you think you were gonna get drafted that year or what?
Oh man, honestly, I the draft was probably the best and worst experience of my life. Just because again, like I wasn't a big guy, right? But I'm watching the 16-year-olds and the 17-year-olds at my birth year. Ryan Huska, he goes in the third round. Darcy Tucker, he goes. Jason Strudwick, like Jason Holland, Brad, all these guys are getting drafted. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like, this is an absolute joke. And I remember I was so upset that I never got drafted in my draft year. But I used it as fuel. Like, everything in my life, everyone always told me, teachers at school, like, I came from a little bit of a broken home. And, you know, I used that as my motivation. Hockey was my release, right? And that's where I could take out my off ice issues and anger. And people always told me I'm too small, I'll never make it. I'm a shit disturber. I cause too many problems, but I just used it always for good. And then the next year, I had a great year again. Like it's not like I wasn't putting up points or I didn't have great years. I did. I had more points than a lot of guys that were getting drafted. It was, I think, just a lot to do with my size. And the next year, um, I'll never forget the I think I was like sixth round with the central scouting, which probably didn't mean a whole lot, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna get drafted. This is so exciting. And I sat there and I waited and I waited and I waited and I started crying. I was by myself in my father-in-law at the time, his his kitchen, and I'm like, I'm in tears. And they finally call me and the Vancouver Canucks, and I was so upset. I could barely talk to them. I'm like, great, thanks. I'm like, basically, you guys lucked out. I'll see you at frickin' training camp. Like I was so pissed. And it's the best thing that ever happened to me. I felt sorry for myself for a day. And then after that, I was right in the gym. I was getting ready and I was going to show everybody you made a big mistake.
That's wild. One of the things I'm having a hockey camp right now, and I'm talking to the kids. We're having some what I call mindset sessions, and I'm talking to them about beliefs and how we get to choose them. Like that an
Yeah.
experience happens, and we get to choose the meaning of it. But we have to be first of all aware that we get to choose because usually we don't. Right? It's just we react. Something happens and we react. And when I hear you tell about that story, right, like that, you could have had a different meaning to that. You mean the
Yeah.
meaning you gave it was screw these guys, they're wrong, and I'm going to show them how wrong they are.
Yeah.
Um, it sounds like it was a conscious choice for you, right? You felt a little sorry for yourself, and then you just made it. You gave it a different meaning, one that was going to serve you. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Geez, you sound like the TV guy, not me, but it was. I mean, I was in tears. I cried buckets of tears because I was embarrassed. I didn't get drafted the year before. we got a lot of pride, right? And I saw guys getting drafted one after another ahead of me, guys I didn't even know who they were, guys that didn't have Memorial Cups, and I'm sitting there, this is an absolute joke. Um, but then on the flip side of that, and I've seen it a thousand times, guys get drafted in the first, second, third, fourth round, and they're like, oh, this is awesome. I deserve this. And they have an arrogance about them. And I find not all of them, but some of them, they don't dig in like they need to, because just because you get drafted doesn't mean anything. That's
Yeah.
great. That's great. And that's what I learned. But that's where that's where the work starts. That's where the real hard work starts, because until you make it, I mean, you're a nobody at that point.
No, 100%. Yeah, and I can speak to that too. I mean, like, I won't get into my draft day story, but yeah, it's an expectation thing, right? Like I was expected to go early. I ended up going 31. 31 sounds glorious, but now when you think you're going to go 10th,
Right.
like that's a
Yeah.
long hour and a half you're waiting there, right? And same thing
Yeah.
that night I was in my bedroom, like, oh my gosh, like it wasn't a great story, but then, it is what it is, and you got to make it what you make of it. What I looked at you, so 10th round, 247, played 374 games. So I mean, we're gonna get into that. Like that's a hard spot to get games from. I mean, like there's 9 guys ahead of you with that team just in that draft alone, right?
Yeah.
Really on the depth chart, right? So
Yeah.
you're dealing with a lot to overcome there to get NHL games. But it was an interesting year because do you know any of the guys that I thought you would have played the most games from that draft, like from that position, right? But there was guys drafted after you that actually played more games. Could you name, there's 5 of them. Could you name any of them?
Oh man, no, not a clue. Really? That's interesting.
Actually, 4. So yeah, so you played. I was like for sure, right? You played 374 games, but Richard Zednik went 249.
Wow.
He played 745. Sergei Berezin went 256. He played
Oh,
502, and then Thomas Holmstrom went after you at 257. Played 1,000
really?
games, and then Kim Jonsson, the last person played taken in the entire draft, the defenseman from Sweden, he played 739 games. So how crazy is that, right? It's wild.
Wow. I love that. I absolutely love that. I hope all the kids out there that are listening to this, like, it doesn't matter like where you get shelved and where you get lumped into or where you get picked or whatever it is you want to say. It means nothing. Nothing. And that's the beauty of it. Like, as you mentioned, you make a choice, right? And how you want to take it.
Mhm.
And again, the old saying, you're only as good as your last game. It's the truest statement in the world. Like, and it goes with anything, whether you're in business, it's your last sale, it's your last year, it's hockey, it's your last shift, it's your last game. It means nothing. You got to keep doing it. It's about consistency. And
Yeah,
that's amazing. I can't even believe that. I
I
had
know.
no idea.
Super wild. Um, Competitive. You played competitive. It sounds like you grew up competitive. Like you're kind of fighting and scrapping and clawing. Then you get to an organization like the Blazers, where it had to be competitive. There, we never really touched on that, but I assume like practices were competitive. Getting in the lineup was competitive. You're always pushing, right? Everyone's trying to get better. I definitely experienced that too in Spokane. Like Brian Maxwell created an environment like that. Mike Babcock created an environment like that where you're pushing, right? You're pushing, you're pushing, you're pushing. Um, that too though doesn't exist everywhere. Even
No.
at the pro level, it's not that same environment. So you step now out of this really successful junior environment. You get drafted by the Canucks. You got a chip on your shoulder. You're trying to prove people wrong, and now you step into Syracuse and the AHL. What was that experience like for you? Sort of your first your first month there in Syracuse and being a pro and being on your own.
Well, uh, so before that, so we win the Memorial Cup in Kamloops, and not a lot of people know this. And this is where my career really kind of turned. Um, and everyone was, because we had the first round picks, we had Tuckers, we had all these guys, and all of a sudden we win the Memorial Cup. I had an amazing tournament, and Vancouver's in the playoffs. Well, I'm told to pack my bag and come to Vancouver. So I get called up, and I'm a black ace now with the Vancouver Canucks in the playoffs, and I was around them. We didn't skate, but we were around them, right? So I was with all these guys, Mark Watton, Scott Walker, all these guys watching the Vancouver Canucks, and they went all the way to the finals to, what was it, Game 7 against the New York Rangers,
Nathan
and I
Lafayette.
yes, and I was right there with those guys. So that's my first like pro experience. I just signed a contract. I got a signing bonus, tiny. Again, more another story for another time, but motivation for me. And now I'm sitting there and I'm like, I got the last laugh. Like I am like kind of in the NHL. Like I'm getting a taste of this. And that experience was so important. And I'll never forget. I showed up with my bags and I get called into Pat Quinn's office. Pat Quinn, like you want to talk about an intimidating guy. He's his office is you walk in and you're on one floor and his desk all mahogany, this wood, his back's to me. He's in this big leather chair and I can see smoke coming up. And he rolls around and turns around in his chair and he's puffing on his cigar. He's like, "What's up, kid? Welcome to the NHL and the Vancouver Canucks." And I'm like, oh my God, like this is Pat Quinn. Are you kidding me? Like this is the coolest thing ever. And he turns out to be it was my only conversation ever really with him after that. But he was the biggest teddy bear and just the nicest man ever. So that was my first experience. And then obviously I went to Syracuse and then, you know, to your question, it was a frustrating thing, as you know, because it didn't matter what I did in junior. Now you're starting all over, all again. You're a rookie as a 20-year-old. I'm a rookie now, and I'm carrying bags and skate sharpeners in the freezing cold. I'm riding the bus, eating soggy subs. I'm like, this is just another glorified extension of junior hockey, like almost worse because at the time I was living in the Syracuse, New York, and I was with the Vancouver Canucks, so I was making like 30,000 Canadian living in a U.S. economy. And in the summers, I had to deliver pizzas at Pizza Hut and to make money from year to year just to get me to my next paycheck, which didn't start till the next season, right? So
Right.
that was my pro experience, and it was awful.
So much to juggle there, right? And that's the thing that, sometimes doesn't get talked about enough. You do have the experience of becoming a bit of an adult prematurely, compared to the general population, right? That's living at home with mom and dad and going to high school and not doing these things. So you go to junior hockey, living with a billet, you're responsible for yourself. Accountability is way higher, I would say, at that age, but you're still not by yourself. You're still not looking for your own apartment. You're still not in a new country necessarily. You're
Yeah.
not paying your own bills. And now you're trying to navigate that space as a 20-year-old, trying to make a team, right? All the other stuff you're talking about, you're still trying to be a hockey player, and yet all this other stuff going on. Was there anyone there that kind of helped you through it, or were you sort of just on your own? Did you feel like in that scenario to figure it out?
Well, again, great leadership, and that's the part of hockey that people don't understand, and that's where I know and you know now more than ever, like the hockey is the hockey, but the guys that survive are the guys that can figure out in their mind and they can turn positives or negatives into positives and they can, move forward mentally and deal with the grind and fight the grind and fight the adversity. It's the guys that there's so many more skilled players than me that probably should have made it on their hockey stuff, but they couldn't deal with the mental game. And that's why sports and life is so much more about the mental aspect of it. And for me, like even with my kid, a 16-year-old kid, like it's the mental side, dealing with the veterans, dealing with all of it, the ups and downs. The best players in our game, everyone goes through slumps, but the best players in the games, their slumps don't turn into this like other guys do. They turn into slumps that last this long because
Yeah.
they can work their way out of it. They they battle mentally to get themselves out of that funk and that groove. And that is the biggest thing for me when I went to play pro is it's the mental game and just focusing every day is a new day and just making the most of every day and getting better every day. And then stuff will work its way out. And that's kind of how I dealt with it.
Hey there, everybody. Thanks so much for listening to Nasher and I discuss his career. I appreciate you guys tuning in and spending time with me again this week. As always, much gratitude on my side. And again, thank you so much for the reviews and the ratings and the sharing. The social media posts really help. And this week, I just want to say thanks to a new review that came in. It says, a great pod by a pro, 5 stars. At TA Mayer, Meyer 78, who says, I listen with my son who is 10. Great perspective on the game and development. Thank you so much, TA Mayor 78, and the others that have contributed to the review system. Again, we are tracking on Chartable. I am now in the top 50 hockey podcasts in Canada, which is amazing. There's so many things that are out there that you guys can listen to, and for you to choose to be with me here with my guests, I truly do appreciate it. And again, the more that you guys do review, the more that you do share and talk about it, the more we grow, and the more these great stories and these great perspectives and lessons can get in to more people's hearts and in more people's ears. And that's what this is all about. I want kids and parents and coaches to really understand what this great game's about and how we can make those around us better, not only better hockey players, but better people. And I believe these stories help in doing that. So thanks again. And now we'll get back to our interview with Tyson Nash. Yeah, you're almost you're essentially a commercial there, Nasher, for what it is that I'm like that I do now. What I'm so advocate and big advocate for is the mental side, the mindset side. And for me, it's funny because I came actually at it a different way, potentially a different way, maybe not. I mean, you got your 370 games. I had 41, right? And that's part of the podcast at the beginning. And I think there's a lot of people that would line up that saw me play junior or saw me as a whatever and thought I would have had a longer pro career, right? I never really thought that I was mentally weak either. I don't think I was, right? I mean, there was a lot of things that I would do, that other guys like my buddies weren't able to do or capable of doing. But it was that one little thing he said, that like the negatives into positives, like to continually to try and reframe your experience of what this means to you right now. And like continually trying to get better, continually trying to find a way to get to where you want to go, right? And that's where I think that I made some mistakes. And that's why I love talking to guys now about the mistakes that I made and understanding that that is a huge portion. Like what you said is exactly right. It's a massive portion. Of course, opportunity matters. Of course, a few of these other, like your circumstances matter, but the accountability on what you can control, and we really understand the whole bandwidth of that, right? Like what is actually within our control that's outside of our circumstances, and we can harness that. My gosh, you become a powerful athlete and a powerful human, right? And I think some guys get a little easier than others, but I do 100% believe that it's a skill. I think that you can be taught. I think it can be mentored. I think it can be, discussed. And like anything else, the more you put in the reps, the better you get at it, right?
Yeah.
So the more you think about it, the more you think about it, the more you think about it, the quicker it happens. And you mentioned a short slump to a long slump. One of the things, Nash, you'll probably like this, and maybe you'll use it. I don't know. I call it closing the gap, because closing the gap is such a hockey term, right? Defensemen want to get up and eliminate the gap so that you can't generate offense. How about that with your mindset and with situations? Because if you can't reframe something quickly in the moment, whether that be in a game after a mistake or whether that be being sent down or whatever, and you have these long times of feeling sorry for yourself, you're losing an opportunity massively, and someone's stepping into that void, right? So the quicker we're able to close the gap, I think the better we are. And I think the best in the world, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, like are able to do that. It happens. They reset, they reframe, bam, back into the state. Here we go, right?
You have to. You absolutely have to. And if you don't, you will not succeed. You won't succeed in life. And a lot goes into it. Now I do broadcasting, right? So it's a different animal where every start of the show we got our microphones and you're all pumped up, you're jacked up, and the national anthem's going, and boom, the cameras come on, and some games I just suck. I can't spit anything out. My tongue feels 10 sizes too big for my mouth. Nothing came out like I practiced in the rehearsal. And there were times early in my broadcast career where I'm sitting there going, "Oh my God, I sucked. That's so embarrassing. I can't believe that. Oh my God." And my partner at the time, Dave Strader, and God bless his soul, he's not with us anymore, but he is a Hall of Fame broadcaster. He knew it. He could see it in my body language, and he'd look at me and go, "Shake it off, kid. Shake it off. Let's go. Let's go. Let's wind it up. Let's get this thing rolling. Forget that." And it helped me. And now, if I have a bad open to the show, and I still do, it lasts about 5 seconds. Where before I'd sit there for 5 minutes and be like, and then I would get worse and worse and worse because I was thinking about what happened at the start of the show. So you got to shake it off. The mental game, I'm telling you, I agree with you. I love what you're doing. It's, I bet it's 60% of what we do in hockey, in life, is how you manage your thought process.
Yeah.
and it's a grind, man.
Oh, I agree. And especially when you get to that level, right? I mean, if you're playing junior hockey, like everyone wants to fall in love with talent, and there's a few people out there that exist that just are just better, right? I mean, but I'm not talking about those outliers. I'm talking about everyone else that's like there, that
Yep.
has that talent level. Everyone's fighting for these few spots, and I think that's when this element that we're talking about really takes over, right? Like the perseverance, the resilience, the ability to adapt, all those like life skills, character skills are way beyond how well you can toe drag or release a shot that are going to get you that opportunity to play at the highest level and to stay there too, right?
There's practice players, as you know, and then there's game players. And I watch these kids now, and I see all the skills they do and learning to go around cones and all this stuff. But and that's on a smaller level. But then you get to a game, and then who shows up? So I coached all through minor hockey, and my son, I always knew who my gamers were. I know who my practice guys were, and they'd fly and rip one bar down in practice, but get to a game, it would never transfer over. And it's the same with hockey. And then you take it a step further. I knew my regular season guys, and I knew guys that I played with in the regular season that put up points, were awesome, but it got to playoff time and they choked and they couldn't friggin' find that next gear to take it to the next level. And we all played with guys like that. And another example, I'll take it a step further because we both love golf. I got a bunch of pro golfers that I play with back in Arizona, and they're like, Nasher, there's so many better golfers than me, so many better golfers than me. But can they play when the pressure's on? Can they make that putt when it counts? And that, like, that is the simplest way I can put it because we all play golf. And
Yeah.
that's what it comes down to. It's nothing more than that. Can you manage those emotions? Can you rise to another level? And it can all be learned. I 1,000% agree with you.
Yeah. When you were mentioning there having a rough start to the show, and you're beating yourself up and the self-talk's going south and you're reminding yourself what an idiot you were and all these things are happening. If we relate that to hockey, and this is a question maybe that some of the younger guys can learn from you. I'm sure you played with a coach that you felt, or in a scenario where you felt that they were trying to wait for you to make a mistake. Like, so when that mistake happened, that was now the excuse for you not to play, or that was the excuse for you, to be sent down, or whatever the case may be. And then you were probably also played in a scenario where you felt like that was part of the process of getting better, that they were on your side, that the mistake was okay as long as we use it as a learning opportunity, and we're getting better from it. If you can relate to those two scenarios, like, what do you say to the guy that maybe feels like he has a coach that's waiting for him to screw up? Like, how do you get past that pressure of having somebody maybe not really supporting you and the process that it takes sometimes to get better?
Well, and I can relate this to, first of all, if you make a mistake, and they're going to happen, hockey is a game of mistakes, life is a game of mistakes, but it's how you respond after that mistake. I mean, that is the most important thing. That's where all eyes are on you. And maybe you get another chance the next shift. Maybe you got to sit a whole period until you get your next chance. But it's that guy who rises and makes amends to that mistake that is going to continue to rise in life and in hockey. But I had a little bit of a different scenario in Vancouver. Again, I was a 247th overall draft pick. I wasn't a first, second, third round. Those guys got every opportunity in the world. So when I got there, I felt like a nobody, a nothing, because I wasn't a early draft pick. So every game, I had a coach that was waiting for me to make a mistake and be like, okay, you're done. Now I can put you on the bench. Now you've made that mistake and I can justify it, right?
Mm.
Where I would make sure that I had the best first period, the best first shift of the game. I was so razor focused that I never made that mistake and I set the tone and I for our team so that he didn't have that excuse. And that final year, I mean, I think I scored almost 20 goals every year in the American Hockey League in Syracuse for the Vancouver Canucks farm team. I never got a chance. So I knew it was never going to happen, but I always made sure that I was on the top of my game so that my coach couldn't have that in his back pocket to be like, okay, they're right. Now I'm going to sit you. Now I'm going to make you a healthy scratch.
Right.
So it was a mental grind for me that way. But again, it was fuel for the fire for me, even
Uh,
at the pro level.
yeah, that's wild. Um, and sometimes maybe that adaptability you had with your game maybe served you well. I mean, I don't know what type of game you were playing there in the minors, but as somebody that's going to, you're going to bang, right? You want to hit somebody, you want to make an impression, you want to get noticed. I can imagine you out there doing that. Uh, how about the center iceman that's supposed to be a playmaker that makes that bad play, or turns the puck over? And now we're supposed to have, is it a short-term memory thing where you go back out there? Because I see a lot of guys, because they don't want to make the mistake, now they stop playing, right? And
Yeah,
now they become real simple. And I can relate to that actually, because that's where I never really got past that level in the NHL where it was like, holy shit, like I just don't want to screw up. Right. And when you're playing like you don't want to screw up, you're not really playing. At least I wasn't. I was just
yeah.
playing safe. Any advice for guys like that are maybe playing a little too safe? Is it a short term memory, or is it an internal belief system in your opinion, or what is it?
I think in anything, you can't be fearful. What you fear is what you create, and I'm a big believer of that. I think what you put in your head is going to happen. So if you're worried about making a mistake because you made a mistake, on your last shift, it's just bound to happen again. It's the same thing with injuries. If you're worried about getting hurt and you play tentatively, that's when you get hurt. It just it's the nature of the beast.
Right.
Um, and I guess for me on that note, the best advice, and we all got great advice at some point from our dads or as a coach. And my dad, so after I played in Vancouver and Syracuse, they just let me go. My contract expired. I became a free agent. St. Louis called me on July 1, which is the first day of free agent signing. And I couldn't believe my phone rang. And Larry Plow, who's a Hall of Fame general manager, he called me and said, "We've been watching you for 3 years. We love you. Um, I don't care that you're going to be a walk on at training camp for us. If you sign this contract, we don't care what you are, first round, second round. If you play good enough and you play what we've seen you play in the American League, you're going to make our team." I said, "Where do I sign?" So I go to training camp, and my dad says to me, he goes, "Son, you played 3 years in the American Hockey League. You're now 23 years old." He goes, "You're not going to get many more opportunities. This is it. Whatever you do, don't say woulda, coulda, shoulda when this training camp is over. Don't say it after your first shift. Don't say it after day one of training camp. Whatever you have to do, make an impression." And that's what I did. And it brought me back to even when I was a 16-year-old in Kamloops, my first shift in St. Louis Blues training camp. I put my jersey on and we go out to scrimmage. They drop the puck, and Pavel Demitra, the leading scorer of the St. Louis Blues the year before, gets the puck, comes up the blue line, cuts across the blue line. I hit him in the trolley tracks. I knock him unconscious. I separate his shoulder. They carry him off in a stretcher. And I'm sitting there going, "Oh my God." And I can hear Tony Twist and Kelly Chase, who are on the other team, two of the toughest guy to play in the NHL at the time, were screaming bloody murder at me. And I'm sitting there, what have I just done? But I'm like, well, I guess I got noticed. And I think I fought 3 or 4 times in that scrimmage. I had my nose was on the side of my face, my eye was black and blue, my ear was swollen shut. And the coaches were like, "Who is this guy?" And that's how my career started in the NHL. And ultimately, that's how I made it.
Wow, Nasher, that is so wild.
Yeah.
That's so wild. That takes me back to Tom Laidlaw. Tom Laidlaw said his first camp, he came in of neutral zone and just plowed over Phil Esposito, who was at the tail end of his career, and he goes, "I just didn't know how to do it any different way." And he's like, "I was probably too dumb to know the difference," is I think the way he put it. But he's like, it got him noticed, it got him some respect. Did
Yeah.
you actually have to go with Twister? Did that happen?
Well, I never fought Twister because Kelly Chase jumped over the boards. So it was funny. Bob Plager, who's a legend, St. Louis Blues legend, he's our coach for my team. So after the hit, I go to the bench to make a change. I'm like, "Oh, I want to get off the ice here." He goes, go back out." So I go back out. Kelly Chase jumps over the bench. He basically didn't even have his gloves on when he came to the center ice dot. And he goes, "You know what has to happen, right? I'm going to freaking kill you." And I'm like, "Yep." Dropped the gloves, took the buckets off, and we fought at center ice the very next shift. And he beat me absolutely senseless. But I stood in there. I took it. I took my licks. My nose was broken. It was on the side of my face, gushing blood. I pick up my gloves because there's no referees really, right? So you pick up your gloves and your stick You don't go to the penalty box. You go back to your bench. So I go back to the bench, and Bob Plager goes, go back out there. And I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? This is my coach for my team. I go back on the ice and I'm standing at center ice. And Kelly Chase is like, what the heck is this kid doing? So he comes back out to center ice and the puck gets dumped into the corner. And I run it and I'm like, screw this. I got nothing to lose. I run into the corner and it's Al McInnes. And I freaking take a run at Al McInnes and he puts a stick up right across my lips, like right across, cuts me for friggin' like I don't know, 8 stitches on my lip. And finally, I was able to make a line change. But the coaches, because they were always up in the stands, right? Joel Quinville was like, who the heck is this guy? And I kind of like him. This kid's got fire. So,
Oh, 100%. Oh, I love that story. My God. So your first shift was like 5 minutes long, included a
oh,
fight,
yeah. Oh,
included like
yeah.
knocking out their best player.
But don't you see these kids now? Like, and it drives me crazy because I'm a broadcaster now. I watch all these, I've watched 15 NHL training camps and I watch these young kids come in as rookies. And I'm like, okay, like you're a fifth round, sixth round pick. I'm like, or you're a walk on. I'm like, what are you doing? Like you're going through the motions out there. I know you're intimidated. I know you're the mental game. You're scared to death. You're in your first NHL camp, but you have to throw that out the window. You have to somehow get noticed. Somehow, this is your opportunity, and you don't get many, as you know, to
Yeah.
make an impression. And you have to make sure you make the most of it.
Yeah. What awesome advice from your dad, though. Like, seriously,
Yeah,
like that is so cool because I mean, I just felt that in my bones when you were saying that. And who knows, right? I mean, the thing is, with all this coaching stuff and the stuff I do now, right? Like the message can be right, but unless the guy's ready to hear it, it doesn't matter,
yeah,
you know? And I don't know back when I was 22 or 23, and if someone would have said, hey, man, that same message, if it would have resonated quite as well. But I kind of always thought there was going to be another chance for some reason.
right,
Like I
right.
got there, traded Toronto, and like that sort of seemed to be in the books. And I mean, okay, great. And then Fletcher gets fired, and now I'm scoring 40 in the minors and not getting called up and don't really know why and think I should be good enough. And then get traded to LA. And that was really like that one there. Like for me, if someone would have put me aside and said, hey, this is your second trade, man.
Yeah,
Right. This is your second trade. You have an opportunity here. Like grab it hard and don't let go. And I mean, I was serious, but I mean, it wasn't like that. Like your level of intensity with that and like your level of like commitment to that opportunity was not the commitment I had. Right. And it'd been interesting if there was that voice in my ear, if I would have grabbed on that hard, because you're right, man. Like it does, you never know. That might have
or
been.
how many times, like in your life, in my life, after a situation, after an opportunity, you're sitting there on the bus and you're like, oh man, like I wish I would have done that. I should have done that. I could have done that. And you're like, no, like, and you're right. Like at that stage in my career, I was so upset at what happened in Vancouver. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't there to make friends. In fact, everyone in that organization, as far as players went, they hated me. They couldn't stand me. I just took out their leading scorer, who actually is on the team,
Yeah.
right? So they're like, this guy's a piece of crap. Like, get this guy out of there. But I got noticed. And I think that there's just so many times in your life that you're like, you walk away from something and you're regretful. And I think you owe it to yourself to not be regretful for any opportunity that's given to you to make the most of it.
Good for you, man. Like that's one of the biggest I find, at least, in the work that I've done, uh, just with psychology and understanding how people tick and what makes people work and the fear of judgment. And I find that especially in
Yeah.
pro sports is massive, right? Because what you just said there, like you were prepared to be hated,
Yeah.
essentially, right? You were
Yeah.
like, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to make a hockey team. And that's a really hard hurdle for a lot of guys to get over because you want to be liked, right? You
Yeah.
want to fit in. You want to be one of the guys. Um, but really, you mean like you ended up earning their respect. I'm sure you weren't hated once you made that team. I'm sure like it all worked out for you, but you had to be prepared to be really uncomfortable for 2-3 weeks to see what was going to happen.
Yeah, and the other thing, like that's such a good point. And I see kids, and I see it in my son and my kids at gym class in school. Like it's just gym class, but they don't want to. They're called tryhards, and they're made fun of for being a tryhard. I'm like, what? I'm like, when did this exist? I go, we got all the girls in school if we were the best athlete or the best at track and field or the best. Like you didn't get ridiculed for being the best at something. I go, that's a bogus way to think and talk, man. I go, forget it. I go, you can't be fearful of embarrassment either. Like going out there and trying your hardest and falling, or a coach, a dad, a mom, whatever, will never ridicule for going out there and trying your hardest and failing, right? I mean, you
Mhm.
can always sleep at the end of the day for that.
Yeah, no, good for
So,
you. And I think that message now, like what we're talking about, it's I think it's needed more than ever because, and this is just my own little personal take, but because the way society is starting to like function, school,
yeah.
like we don't get grades anymore, right? And we don't do this, we don't want to make somebody stand out. And it's like that whole culture of like not being a tryhard is like, it makes me sick to my stomach, right? But like that is what these kids are coming up with now, right? So it's like, all right, we don't want to look like we're really trying to be our best because that's going to ostracize us in some way,
And
and it's,
and that's exactly right. And it's crazy to me because what's the real world like?
mhm,
Not like that. The real world rewards you. In business, you get rewarded for
yeah,
trying hard and battling and doing your best. And in hockey, you don't try hard, you don't make the NHL. Like
yeah.
you don't get rewarded. It's just not how it works. So to your point, that's brilliant.
Well, and if we bring that full circle, like talking about a way to get noticed now, like, you know, you did it back in the day where guys like there wasn't just Tyson Nash doing that. There was other guys trying to do that. Like, and I think now there's even less guys trying to do that. So like in this era where these guys are coming up and everyone's skilled and everyone's fast and everyone's cute, right? If you want to show right? That
Yep.
you want to be there, that you're different, man, you're going to stand out like an absolute sore thumb. So if you can embrace this earlier, and that's what I mean, like 13, 14, like start getting it in your DNA right now, like that's going to be a difference maker for you going forward.
It'll never go away. It will in
Mhm.
our lifetime, it will never go away. In business, in hockey,
Yeah.
someone who comes up, if I'm running a business and is all in, is balls to the wall, and does something outside the box, like even from what I know and read on their resume, I'm taking them all day long. They're risk takers, they're battlers. And again, we talked about Darcy Tucker, and you asked me about this guy, and this is it in a nutshell. Because a lot of kids are probably going, "Well, that's great. Tyson Nash was always a plug, like whatever. I'm not a fighter. I don't want to be a fighter." But Darcy Tucker wasn't either. This guy scored 60 goals in the American Hockey League. He was scoring 20 goals in the NHL every year. But this guy came in and he is 5 foot nothing, 160 pounds nothing. This guy was scoring 60 goals in junior. He didn't have to fight, but he went in there and he fought and he did what it took to make it. And if you can bring that element as a scout, as a GM, you're going, "Oh my God, this guy, I know he's skilled and talented, but look at him battle." Like
Yeah.
this is eye-opening to me. I give him a freaking double star.
Yeah. Yeah. You can, I mean, the fighting is what, I mean, camps aren't what they used to be 100%, right? They're
Yeah.
trying to tell you you're not supposed to, but like, yeah, there's still a way to be gritty and get noticed 100% and play with that edge and separate yourself. And I think it's easier than ever to do that. That's my personal opinion, but
Right.
guys got to want to do it. The guys got to want to
Yeah.
buy in. They got to see that there's a difference there. I want,
Uncomfortable. Yeah.
yeah. So you had the first year, I love that Larry Plouffe said that too. What a great way to sign a guy and to actually
Oh,
believe that. You know what I mean? Like you believed it and he was honest and authentic about it because a lot of guys wouldn't be like that.
yeah.
So you believe him, you say yes, you sign the dotted line. You do go play with Worcester though, but you got your first NHL games that year. Looks to me like maybe it was at the end of the year because then you also played a playoff game. Is that how that went for you?
Yeah, so I finished the training camp, had a great training camp, as I mentioned, and I got noticed, and they were watching me every game in Worcester. I had a coach named Greg Gilbert, and this is what changed it for me. This is the best coach I've ever had in my entire life. This guy taught me to be okay, Tyson. This is how you're going to make it. As Tyson Nash, this is how you're going to make it. There's lots of skill players. There's lots of guys that can put the puck in the net and do all that. St. Louis has a lot of those guys, probably too many of those guys. What are you going to do that's going to differentiate you from the rest of the group? And whatever that is, you need to be the best at it. And I worked on it all year. He taught me every game, every practice. that puck's got to get out on the blue line. That puck's got to get, that play's got to be made here. You can't, if you're going to get to the next level, you get that opportunity in the NHL. That puck can't be turned over here or there. That can happen in the American League. It can't happen in the NHL because Brett Hall is going to take that puck and stick it right in your net. So I was like, okay, this all makes sense. He was the first positive coach that actually believed in me. And by him believing in me, I wanted to go to another level. I wanted to work harder in the gym, harder on the ice. I'd go through a wall for this guy just because he believed in me. And coaches, I just can't figure out, bosses, I can't figure out for the life of me how and why that hasn't changed sooner. I think we're seeing that now.
Yeah.
But if you believe in someone, like, oh my God, like the stuff that they are capable of is tenfold from what you've been getting out of them. And that's what Larry Plow gave to me. That's what Greg Gilbert gave to me. And ultimately, again, to your question, I signed on the dotted line. I finally got my opportunity in St. Louis. And again, it was that same message from my dad. It was an afternoon game. I got called up to the Blues. I'd spent 4 years in the American Hockey League now. I'm like, this is my only opportunity, and this is it right here. Afternoon game against the Dallas Stars. I played 6 minutes that night. I think I had 10 hits. I ended up running over somebody. I fought Pat Verbeek. Um, Joel Quinbo was just like, oh my God, this guy is out of his mind. This is the coolest. I love this guy. So I traveled with them the next day. We played in Toronto. I went after Matt Sundin. I went after Ty Domi. I had Tony Twist next to me. So Tony Twist was loving it too because he's like, dude, you make my job look so easy because you stir it up and I go in there and clean it up. And so it was easy. I made his job easy. The guys were like, what is this? Who is this guy? Like, what is he even doing? I think I drew 2 penalties that night. Power play went out there. Chris Pronger, Al McInnes to Turgeon to the back of the net, and I found my niche. And then after we finished in Worcester, in the playoffs, I was the first guy called up, and I played in the first playoff game after St. Louis took out Arizona in Game 7. We played the Dallas Stars. I played my first ever playoff game. I played 6 minutes that night. Didn't go so well. I finished -3. Um, yeah, so I
And didn't
cried.
get back in.
I cried. Yeah, I cried. I went home. And again, it's that mental game that you have to play with yourself, right? Everything was going great. All of a sudden, I hit a brick wall and I was -3. Wasn't sure I was ever going to play again. And I had to think about that all summer long.
Wow. That is pretty, but obviously still made an impression because it looks like then you end up making the team out of camp next year, right?
Yeah, yeah. I made it out of training camp. And yeah, I tried to forget about that experience. And I went in there and did the same thing all over again. I mean,
Right.
again, it was not an easy thing to do. But yeah, you got to do whatever it takes, right? How
You
bad you
talked
want
about,
it.
yeah, you talked about Brad Gilbert there, and I think that's awesome because what a gift that was. And I want to have Jared Smithson on here one of these times too, because he talked about his experience in the AHL after being an AHLer for a while. That a guy took the time to teach him the game that he needed to learn, to get to that next level, what face-offs, and to learn how to play in his own end, and ended up playing 500-600 games, whatever he played. After a lot of people would have written him off, kind of essentially, and so you had Gilbert come in there and do the same for you. What, like, in that experience there, you talk about coaches are kind of going through an evolution, and I couldn't agree more. And I think it's like, my gosh, I can't believe it took this long. But like,
Hmm.
when somebody wants to spend a little time with you, like someone wants to give you that little bit of a fire to say, you know what, this guy does. Not only does he believe me, but at least he cares about me. Like, he
Hmm.
gives a shit. Like, that's a big thing for a player. And I think when it's your coach, I think you're pretty lucky. I think if anyone has anybody in their circle other than their parents, I think that can also be a pretty big advantage. But um, did you ever say thanks to Gilly? I know that's what he was supposed to do and that's his job, but sometimes it seems like when I talk to guys, like, you sort of get that special connection. And it almost turns into something a little different than a player coach thing when that happens.
Oh yeah, I have never forgotten it, and that's the beauty of our game. It's such a small circle, and you're still friends with the guys in Sherwood Park as I am, and you appreciate all the people that have helped you along the way because it takes a lot of them. And I think for the first 2 or 3 years, I sent them a case of wine every year, just to say thank you for believing in me. And I mean, it was it's the only reason I made the NHL. It truly, really is because he believed in me. I never had anyone believe in me. I had everyone always fighting against me and telling me I was never going to be good enough and telling me I wasn't big enough, wasn't fast enough, wasn't skilled enough, and that wears on you after a while. And at some point, whether it's your kids as a parent, like even parents are so hard on their kids. I'm like, what are you doing? And I was that guy too. I
Mm.
used to be so hard on my kid, coaching him until he wanted to quit. And that was a wake up call for me. And I'm like, oh my God, like I love this game. I almost made my son quit because I was like a Mike Keenan on the bench. And
Right.
I'm like, what am I doing? That's not even my personality. And it was breaking my kid. And and same thing for him. He found a coach the next year, and this guy loved on him. And he completely went from here to here because someone believed in him. And that's sometimes all it takes. And it's not just hockey, it's in your own house, making your kids that think that they are the best. And what can go wrong if a kid is full of confidence? You know, a little bit of arrogance. There's nothing wrong with that. Little confidence is all you need.
Sure, 100%. How do you feel? That's an interesting subject because confidence, again, I see it in homes, right? I see it kind of in society, and there's maybe this idea of like telling kids that they're, "Oh, you can do anything you want. You're great. You're so smart. You're so this. You're so that." And there's this idea that that's going to give kids confidence. Yet they're not able to fight the battles that actually gives them, in my opinion, the real confidence, right? So I think that there's a fine line when it comes to coaching and parenting, in my opinion, where you want to make them feel like the power of possibility is endless, right? But then they're also in control of what that is, and they can get themselves out of situations. So we don't remove all the walls and all the obstacles for them, right? So they never have to experience adversity. Because I
Yeah.
think that's where that kind of that real element of confidence comes from. How do you feel about that?
I agree with you. I mean, I think if we look at both of our stories or anyone's stories who have made it, all the adversity. I mean, no one gets there on a golden road, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's not it's not the way it works. And you're absolutely right. I think confidence is earned, and you can only be confident once you've gone through stuff and overcome stuff, to realize that, because you can't fake that, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you can't fake confidence, because you know down deep that what you're feeling inside in your heart and your mind, the stuff that's going through your mind. So it is earned. And kids, we want to, as parents, we want to take and make it so easy on our kids, but you have to fight against that, because and as coaches too, because they need to go through it and they need to rise above it. And when they do, the power that you get within is just, you can't experience that because of just empty words.
Right. You getting back to, I mean, we didn't talk about the East Coast League, and maybe we don't have to, but I mean, in your first year pro, you ended up playing in the East Coast League for a little bit. Like you said, didn't really feel like you had much of a chance in Syracuse. Now you signed this new ticket in St. Louis, one more year with them in the minors, and then you're in the NHL consistently for what does it look like, six seasons. Um, like you made it. You were an NHLer. You mean you weren't a fringe guy. You were in the show, and you earned your place there. In that time frame, I looked the one year, like your first year there, you led the St. Louis Blues by like 60 penalty minutes in PIMS. Um, was that where you kind of got your stranglehold? Do you think? Like, were you that agitator? Were you that guy that was going to fight and run people over? Like, was that kind of where you sort of segmented yourself into that lineup, and then in the future to allow yourself to stay in that league?
Yeah. So back to your East Coast thing. I mean, that was the lowest of lows in my entire career. And again, it got back to that point where Vancouver was just looking for any reason to bury me. I got a concussion. I came back, and they said, we're going to send you down there for conditioning. And they couldn't have been happier, right? Just to get rid of a body, so they didn't have to make someone a healthy scratch, right? Because when I was playing, I would make it impossible for them to make me a healthy scratch. I mean, it just, the players on the team they couldn't accept it if they were like, you can't sit him out. He's working his ass off every shift every night. So again, that was the lowest of lows. Another mental battle, more adversity that you need to overcome. And again, you want to prove people wrong, right? So that was
Mhm.
my fuel. And then yeah, as I mentioned, when I got to St. Louis, I had to fit in. I had to find a role. We had a lot of guys that were skilled, a lot of guys that were I brought something different to the table. And Joel Quinville came to me and said, Nasher, I'll never forget. It was in the bowels of the rink. It was in the hallway, right in front of the St. Louis Blues logo on the wall. And he said, Nasher, he goes, can you keep this up? And I said, what do you mean, coach? He goes, can you keep playing this hard and being this big of a dick? And I go, yeah, if it keeps me out of the minors. And he goes, well, if you can do that and you can be the most hated guy in this league, you always have a job with the St. Louis Blues. Go get a place to live. And I was like, oh my God. I had tears rolling down my cheeks. I think at the time I just got my first cell phone that was like this big. It was like a big lunchbox. I called my wife and told her the news and said, pack up. We're staying in St. Louis, and the rest was history. And I think, you know, and then the flip on that though, like I never, I did that for as long as I could. And I'm not a big guy, but the body just wore down after a while. I think I think I went through two lockouts. I signed 9 one-way contracts with the Blues and Arizona, but the body just started to deteriorate. But the biggest thing for me and the message to the kids is I never evolved. I always just accepted my role. And even though that's what made me and got me to the NHL, you need to evolve and you need to get better every single day, because there was games where I was playing, 6, 7 minutes a game. You're getting 6 or 7 shifts. So when you get practice time, you got to continue to work on your game. You have to continue to get better. And that's why I really admire guys in the NHL like the Darcy Tuckers that got better and evolved into those more skilled players. The Steve Otts, the even as far back as the Kenny Linsmans, the Esa Tikkanens, the Sean Averys, like they evolved and turned into really good hockey players. I never did that. I just accepted my role, and that was ultimately my downfall.
Yeah, downfall, I guess, of becoming maybe having a little more longevity, right? Because you said
Yeah,
you can't to play that role that you played. Tough to do that at 35, you
yeah,
know. Uh,
yeah,
but a guy I had on that maybe you'd like to listen to, or maybe you had was Scott Nickel, and I mean he was from
yeah,
from our age group there in junior, and I was able to play with him in Detroit, where he had already been like I think 7 years in the minors. You know, I mean 5 foot nothing, 150 nothing pounds. And if there was ever a guy that you thought was a career minor leaguer, like a good character guy, like that was going to be there forever, was Scott Nickel. And he kind of had a similar story when he got his second life there in Calgary. He's like, this is my chance. This is
yeah,
my chance for this new team. And then the little bastard, doesn't he stick around for like another 10 years or whatever the
yeah,
hell he did,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah. And I
unbelievable
think
story.
I think his coach, if I'm not mistaken, in Calgary was Greg Gilbert.
Yeah.
Was
Hey,
my
there you
guy.
go.
That was
Yeah.
my guy who, and I'm sure he had the same. I'd love to talk to him. That's interesting. I used to fight Scott Nickel every single game. We used to fight in junior, in the NHL, I believe, in the minors. Like this guy was just he was a little, what a story he is. You're right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you guys you guys sort of remind me of each other a little bit. I mean, you're both really gritty, both did it on your heart, right? Like made a difference. You were that guy, willing to be that guy every night. And that's another thing, right? Because those guys in the locker room are necessary, not even just on the ice, but even in the locker room. What was that like for you? And I know we're getting close to time here. God, this always happens. I haven't even talked about your broadcasting yet, but being somebody that people don't like. We talked about that judgment thing. I know I assume you got the respect of your own team in the locker room, which is really all that matters. But when you're going out there every night and you are that guy that the league hates, uh, was that fun for you? Was it something that you didn't like? Like how was that on just like on a human level for you?
It was awful. It actually tore me up inside because I mean, there was times, especially in the playoffs, where I was a shit disturber. That was my job. I mean, I was probably the most hated guy in the NHL for 3 or 4 years, and I got my face punched in almost every night. Like people wanted to absolutely kill me. My coach couldn't put me on the ice in the last, you know, 10, 15 minutes of a game if we had any sort of lead or we're losing. I mean, just to protect me from guys in that era.
Yeah.
Um, but it was awful because I had to always take it to another level. And in the playoffs, I'll never forget going after guys, like some of the stuff that guys would get me to say. it just wasn't part of my nature, right? But I had to do it. Otherwise, I wasn't effective. If I wasn't stirring stuff up and creating power plays for one of the best power plays in the league at the time with the Blues. So
Mm.
it was something I struggled with internally for sure because there was no one was safe with me. I went after girlfriends, wives, grandmas, and again, it's not something I'm proud of, but you know, I went after Theo Fleury one night, and I still have anxiety over it. I've apologized to him numerous times in person, um, and Kerry Fraser actually heard me say it on the ice, and he made me apologize to him in front of both teams at center ice. You know, in Madison Square Garden, because what I said was offside and totally just gross.
Right.
So.
So you that's an interesting part of the game. I remember Sean Avery, you mentioned him already, and he we were playing in the minors, and at this point I'd played, let's say, 4 years. I don't know exactly. It doesn't really matter. But I hadn't made it right to the NHL. Kind of had my cup of coffee. Was a real good AHL player. Was scoring a lot of points there. And all of a sudden we roll in and we're playing against Sean Avery in the minors, and this guy does not leave me alone. And it's like he's done his homework, right? Like he's hitting every nerve with me that you can imagine, right? Like that I'm a cancer and I'm this and nobody wants me. And like whether it was true or not, but it was like all those little subtle things, like going in
It's
the
in
back.
your
Yeah, right. Like right
yeah,
there. And I'm like, this guy's good. Like I remember leaving that game going, wow, like that wasn't just normal chirps. Like that was like,
yeah.
he's done his homework. Like he knows where I've been. He knows what I've done. Did you find yourself like doing that as well? Were you getting in, like opening up the encyclopedia on guys and trying to get into some dirt stuff?
Oh yeah, it's funny. Like Sean Avery, I think I was Sean Avery's first NHL fight. So he was a guy who wanted to play like me, right? And he wanted that's how he was going to make his niche, right?
Mm.
And it was a big thing, I think, for him when he came up and he asked me to fight center ice in St. Louis, and it was, yeah, it was very interesting. So um, I leaned on a lot of guys. And I mean, it's like in the locker room or whatever, you're on the plane and you're playing, Boston the next night. And, I got Kelly Chase feeding me going, hey, you got to give it to this guy. This is the story. And I'd be like, okay, thanks. Sure enough, I get the center ice or skating by the bench and I would just let it fly. Right. And, again, it's not something I'm proud of because even to this day, like I see a lot of guys around at NHLPA meetings or whatever, and they're kind of like, oh, I freaking hate that guy. Like, there's still kind of, there was
Sure.
lines that I crossed, and
Yeah.
I do regret it in some ways, but again, you have to do what you have to do. I got a family, I got kids, and obviously the NHL was my lifelong dream.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. And maybe we'll tie that up. I mean, we've been here for 90 minutes now, and I really appreciate your time. In saying that, which I think is maybe a nice little bridge to what you're doing now, is this cancel culture that I'll call it. I mean, it's not that I've tagged at this. I mean, it's definitely been said this on social media, but where, there seems like sensitivities are at an all-time high. It seems like, there's a lot of people that are just waiting to say that you made me mad. From a guy that played the way you did, maybe said the things you did, now you're behind a microphone. Do you find yourself having to be completely vanilla? I mean, maybe that's the wrong way to put it, but it sounds like everyone kind of has the same thing to say right now on TV. And I think because, my gosh, if you say anything that's might be a little off, you might not have a job the next day. Like, how do you go about that on a personal level?
Yeah, I fight it because you see some guys firing off on podcasts and, telling stories, and it's like a huge popular thing. But then you see guys that get behind the mic on national television and you can't even breathe the wrong remark, right? You can't say the wrong thing because in the world today, and it is quite sad. I mean, that everything I say, I have to filter through my mind. I have to think about it because the world is changing and a lot for the better for sure, which I do not have an issue with, but sometimes just people are just overly sensitive and critical about and take things out of context, and that's what I don't like is that things can be said and skewed, and you can be tweeting stuff, and social media is also a very dangerous thing. for kids and for people in the workplace. And so you have to be so careful before you hit that send button that you're not going to offend people, because everything right now in the world gets taken the wrong way. And if people don't like you, they'll find something in what you've said and make it that way or appear to be that way. So it's scary times, to be honest, to have a microphone, a live microphone, and try to be funny, try to be humorous and entertaining, and still be obviously informative about the great game of hockey as well. So it's for sure different times, but we're all adjusting, and it's just more adversity for all of us.
Yeah, it's interesting because I just think there is a lot of people that like to still hear. Like that's what I loved about Grapes. Like for me personally, it was like, did I agree with everything he said or how he said it? Not at all. But it was interesting to listen to him, and and maybe I wasn't the brunt of all his jokes, and I wasn't. But I mean, I just think he was an old guy that had an opinion, and old guys with opinions aren't going to have make everyone happy all the time, And it was,
Yeah,
I don't know. I just think that flavor of like having the individual be allowed to be an individual, I think is lost. And what I hope, Nasher, is like that. The pendulum like swings, right?
yeah,
Like so we're in the process of making a change. Like you've already echoed that. I think it's for the better. I think we all agree that it's for the better, but I think it's gone a little too far the
yeah,
one way. And I hope that that's going to swing back and we can find a little bit of a medium here where we are more tolerant, that we're definitely understand people's sensitivities, but where we can still have an opinion, we can still have a laugh, and we can still enjoy each other in that space, right? Without feeling fearful of maybe losing a job or ostracizing somebody, whatever the case may be. And so I respect
yeah,
what you guys are doing. I'm not a Mike Milbury fan. I never met the man, but I mean the stories that I've heard and from guys who played for him. But like his comment there, like I was like, man, like in my personal opinion was like, wow, like I would think that would offend the players more than any women. For me, I had the discussion with my wife, and I know everyone's gonna have a different opinion on that, but it's like to be taken off the air over something like that. I mean, that has
right.
to be something in the back of your mind. Is there a preparation process you go through? We didn't actually get into preparation as a player, but maybe we'll just leave with this. Like preparation for hockey is another one of my big talking points here with these guys is like, come with intention, right? Come with intention to the ice or to your practice, and you come with intention, you're going to get something done. Do you have a preparation or an intention that you try to bring every night?
Yeah, I mean, it's so important. Obviously, being prepared, putting the work in, educating yourself, and then, honestly, for me, and just like hockey, you can't overthink stuff, right? You still have to go out there. It's still a game, and you still just got to do what you've done your whole life, and be who you are and do what you know you can do. Because I think a lot of times in these players, even today, I say it. I'm like, these coaches, the video and the skills and the cones and the everything. It's all great for a certain point, but you still have to go out there and compete. Number one, work hard, number two, and then everything else will fall into place. If you look at the best players in the world, the Sidney Crosbys, the Dadzuk's, the Nathan McKinnon, this guy blows my mind right now. He is not only the most skilled guy on the ice, but he works the hardest. And when you put those things together, along with compete, because I think work and compete is very different,
Yeah.
you put all those three things together, and that's what you get. That's what you get. So when you're a bubble guy or you're an average player and you don't even work as hard as a guy like that, like what is that saying? So again, back to your point, I'm getting all over the place, but it's preparation is absolutely everything, but you do have to just kind of let it freewheel. I know I'm a good person. I know I have a good personality, and when I get on TV, I want that to shine as well, because that's also what we're doing, is entertaining and trying to be fun, and people want to feel like they're in the locker room and they have that environment. But you do have to be a little extra cautious right now with what's being said.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a good place to close. I mean, for me, the preparation and what I've learned from preparation, and it sounds like you're echoing that, is like that's where that big piece of confidence can come from, because
Mm,
now you're not thinking, right? So now when you are doing your broadcast and you're out on there on the ice, the stuff you've done before you got in the ice, whether that's practice, whether that's your visualization technique before the game or the night before, or whatever that thing is for you as an individual, now it's time to go. right?
Yeah.
Now it's time to go. And because you've put the work in, because you've done the attention to detail, you've done your homework, you can just go out there and react and respond and play instead of being in the moment and wondering what you're supposed to do. So I think,
Uh,
again, the quicker that I learned that as I started learning that as a pro. Like, I don't know about you, but like, it's interesting because that's another thing that doesn't necessarily get talked about very much, even at the junior level. Like, how are you preparing to go on the ice for practice?
mhm.
How are you preparing to play the game, to play your best game? When guys start figuring that out and understanding that's a big part of the process, we do show up more confident. We have higher success and we're higher performers. So, Nasher, you're amazing.
Well said.
Awesome
Well
guest.
said.
Really appreciate you coming out today, spending the time with us. What an awesome story. I love the guys with the edge and with the fire and with the spit and vinegar. And like I said, I think the people listening here embrace it, right? It's a bigger opportunity than it ever has been right now. If you want to be a hockey player, to go show guys that you're a little different, stand out from the crowd, and you're going to go places, whether it's a scholarship
Yeah.
or a junior team or an NHL program or whatever. There's people that want guys like that. And I think you're a testament to that, Nasher. So thanks for being here today. And we to go for that boat ride here one of these days.
I love it, man. I'm just down the road. Don't forget me.
All
I got to
right.
get one of those phones that rings.
Awesome. All
Thanks,
right, man.
buddy.
Well, thanks again. Really appreciate it. Amazing guest. And till next time, everybody, play hard and keep your head up. Cheers. Thank you so much for listening to the entire episode and sticking with us. I think that one was pretty easy to stay on board with. What a bunch of great stories. My personal favorite is that training camp story in St. Louis. Being a hockey player and understanding, how hard it is to get into a fight, let alone with somebody you know is going to kick your butt. Picking your stuff up with your nose on the side of your face, thinking you're going to go to the bench and have a glass of water and maybe a breather, and the coach points you back out there. That is really wild stuff, Wild West type stuff, amongst all the other things that we were talking about and sharing. Nasher, I really appreciate your time as always with all the guests that come on. It's 90 minutes, and I know life has so many other reasons calling for us and places to be. But for my guests to take that time and to share these stories with us is, I'm really grateful, and I know the listeners are really grateful. So for Nasher, if you're listening, thank you so much for doing that. I do believe your perspective about effort, and about having the courage, about not caring about what other people are going to think of you, and just keeping your goals and dreams in mind, and no woulda, coulda, shoulda. I love that example from your father too. What amazing advice that was. But advice is one thing, like I said in the episode. The other thing is to actually go out there and live it. To somehow be able to implement that advice is something that gets left sometimes. But you were able to grab onto that advice with both hands, and you took it seriously, and you got 6 seasons in the NHL to show for it. So for all you young listeners out there, you can make a difference. I'm telling you, when you want to dig in and you want to be gritty and you want to be competitive, you can stand out. You can stand out and you can earn that spot, because others sometimes aren't willing to try as hard as maybe they can. So great lessons by Mr. Nash. Awesome episode. Really thank you all for being here. Really appreciate you spending your time, and I keep trying to bring you amazing guests, get some laughs on your face, and give you some good lessons to move forward with your week. So until next time, play hard and keep your head up.